Hello, so welcome to our little introductory video for our seminar on using Q method for socially distanced research, part of the AAG Geography Methods During a Pandemic series. And I am Stentor Danielson from Slippery Rock University. I will be co-leading this seminar with Gretchen Snegas from Texas A&M. And the goal of this introductory video is just to give you a general overview of what Q method is, kind of get everybody a framework for thinking about the things that we're going to talk about in the rest of the seminar, make sure everybody's kind of up to speed together, because I know some of you are coming in with some background, have encountered Q method in one way or another. Others of you are brand new to this Q method thing, so we want to make sure everybody's on the same page here about what this method is, because what we want to do this week is to both teach you about Q method and then also teach you how you can do Q method in a socially distanced setting, so that you can use this method when a pandemic prevents you from being, physically in the same space as the participants in your study. So what is Q method? This is a methodology that was first developed by William Stevenson, who's a psychologist, and his first paper kind of introducing it and giving it the name Q method came out in 1935. So this is almost a century old, but it's been continued and developed and grown since then. And the name Q method is a reference to Pearson's correlation coefficient, or R. So you're probably know all about R if you've taken any sort of statistics class. It's one of the basic statistical operations to calculate R for some set of data. And so Stevenson picked out Q, the next door letter in the alphabet, because when we're doing Q method, we're kind of thinking of doing the kind of correlations that you might do when you're calculating R, but doing them sideways. And so I've got a little data table there to illustrate that. And you can't ever really do Q and R on the same data set. You would need a different data set constructed in a different way, but just to give you the concept, I'm showing you this single table of data here. So we've got our participants, our people we've gathered data on in our rows, and we've got all the different pieces of data we have about each of them in the columns. And so when you're doing R method research, so standard statistical kind of research, you would do correlations between the tests, right, between these different variables that you have about each person across your set of people, right? So you'd be looking at whether column 1 correlates with column 2, does column 3 correlate with column 4, right? And depending on the nature of your study, right, that might mean, does athletic ability correlate with height? Does political orientation correlate with knowledge about climate change? Whatever the topic of the study is, right? You're correlating these variables about people across your set of respondents that you have data on. That's R method. Q method, we're going the other way. So with Q method, we're looking at whether the people correlate with each other. So in the data table I have there is weighs data across the whole range of things that you measured about weigh, all the different questions that you asked in your survey or whatever it is. Does the full range of weighs data correlate with the full range of Bill's data? Right? So are these two people similar to each other on this set of data? Does Jose correlate with Anna? Right? Do they have similar results across this set of data that you have on these people? So Q is correlating people, whereas R is about correlating tests or variables that you have about those people. We sometimes describe Q as the scientific study of subjectivity, because the goal of Q method is to study subjectivity. So how people think about the world and their place in it. That's what we're interested in getting at with Q method, and we want kind of a formal, rigorous way of getting at that subjectivity, of figuring out what is in these thoughts that people have about the world and themselves. So as you're thinking about how to apply Q to the research you're doing, Q would come in when you are looking at subjectivity, when you're interested in what people think and the ideas they have about the world, how they justify the things that they think, all those kind of stuff. So that's what you can apply Q to. and we'll be talking later about how you can combine Q method with other sorts of research methods when you have parts of your study that aren't about subjectivity, and you want to look at the subjectivity and connect it to other aspects of your case study. You can easily combine Q with other methods to do that. So when we're conducting a Q study, we start with what we call a concourse. So a concourse is all the things that people think or say about the topic or issue that you are researching. So if we take climate change as our topic, a very broad topic for this kind of illustration, you can think about all the different things you've ever heard people say about climate change, right? Climate change isn't real, it's a hoax. Climate change is the biggest threat to our world. Climate change is real, but it's too costly to actually do anything about. We should use geoengineering to fix climate change. We could all become vegan to fix climate change. All those things that you might have heard people say about climate change, those are our concourse of subjectivity about climate change. So then each individual's perspective will structure that concourse. So for each individual, some of those ideas they're going to agree with, they're going to think are very important, they're going to be at the top of the list of the things they'd say. If you went up to them and just tell me what you think about climate change, other things they would disagree with or they think are just not so important. And then these perspectives are going to be shared, right? They're going to be kind of clusters of people. So as you're thinking about climate change, right, you can probably already think of, well, there's going to be probably a cluster of people that are going to agree really strongly with the climate change is fake, it's a hoax, it's not real statement, and there's some other things you would expect them to also all agree with, right? You might agree that nature's pretty resilient, we can't really mess it up even if we tried, and they would really disagree with the idea that we should all become vegans because of climate change, right? And there's going to be a bunch of people that have a similar viewpoint, and then some other group of people that's going to have a similar viewpoint that's very different from that. And so our goal is to see what these shared viewpoints are, right? To tease out from the enormous variety of quirky individual viewpoints, what are these kind of shared things? Within this concourse, there are kind of a smaller number of common perspectives that people have, and that's what we want to get at with Q method. So we do that by making the subjectivity that our respondents have operant. We want people to express it through some sort of operations they're carrying out on an instrument that we put in front of them. And so for Q method, what we do is we have them sort a set of statements that represent the concourse. So there's infinitely many things people have said about climate change. We're going to pick out a subset of those things that kind of represent the range of that. So we'll make sure to have one statement that gets at that idea of climate change is a hoax, but we're not going to have to look at every different iteration of every different way someone has phrased that idea. Pick one that kind of represents that. We'll pick one that represents the we should all go vegan to fix climate change thing. We're not going to that'll represent all the different times people have said in slightly different words that you should become vegan. We're going to have this manageable sample of statements taken from our concourse, and we're going to have people sort them. We're going to have them rank these statements according to which ones are like how they think, which ones do they agree with, which ones represent their subjectivity the best, down to the ones that they least agree with or that they are least like how they think. And then everything, in between there. And so traditionally, when we do this, we do it by printing these statements on little cards and having somebody arrange them on a table. And so that's what you can see in the picture there. So that study respondent has all these little cards with statements on them, and she is ranking them in this scale from most like how I think to least like how I think. And if you can see the little paper that's there on the table, that represents what she's going for. We have this sort of quasi-normal distribution where we want people to pick their sort of favorite statements at the top of it and the statements they like the least down at the bottom, and then we don't worry so much about fine distinctions in the middle there, so it makes this kind of normal distribution of this ranking of these statements. So that's how you traditionally do Q method. That, of course, is something that's tough to do if we've got a pandemic and you need to stay socially distanced from people. So we can now, these days, use various sorts of web apps to gather this data. So rather than physically arranging cards on a physical desktop, somebody can take these statements and move them around their computer screen and create this ranking. And then we can electronically collect that data. That way you never have to be in the same room as this person. You don't have to necessarily travel to where the person is located in order to do the Q sort. So it opens up new opportunities for gathering this kind of data if you can do it electronically via the internet. And then you can still use this data in the same way. You can still analyze it and get the same kind of conclusions and results from it that you would get from data gathered in the traditional manner. And we'll talk over the course of this seminar about some of the pros and cons of the electronic versus in-person data gathering methods, some of the things to keep in mind if you're gathering your data solely online as compared to what you might get with a face-to-face data gathering. So once we've gathered these Q sorts, right, once people have ranked these statements and we've recorded their ranking of them, we can then apply factor analysis. So factor analysis will take this list of rankings from each person and we're going to apply it in the Q direction. If you think back to that little data table at the beginning, we're going, instead of a R method factor analysis where we look to correlate the different statements, right, and see the statement 1 and statement 2 tend to get ranked similarly, right, that'd be an R method factor analysis. We're going to correlate the people. And that's going to tell us that, out of our big set of people that we gathered data from, that there are a smaller number of essentially clusters of people, groups of people that have a very similar viewpoint, and so we can average them together to create this factor. Okay, so we're taking this broad range of things that people are thinking, and we're boiling it down so we can say, well, there's basically 3 different viewpoints on this issue. So when we do factor analysis, and this may be something that you're familiar with, again, if you've taken courses on R method statistics, when you do factor analysis, you can rotate your factors. And with Q method, this is a very important step because we can rotate differently depending on the specific research question that we have. So we might be rotating just to get the kind of maximum difference between the viewpoints. We want to see, what happens when we try to distinguish people as much as possible. But we also might say, if in the particular scenario where you're gathering data, there is some specific individual who's, a leadership figure or something, we could rotate so that that person defines a factor and then see how the other factors fall out so that we can look at what is the relationship of other people's viewpoints to this central important viewpoint. Or you might have a viewpoint defined on a theoretical basis, right? You might be testing a theory about what kind of viewpoints you'll find, and you can put that viewpoint into your analysis. You can rotate based on that viewpoint and see what are the relationship of your actual participants' data to this theoretically defined factor. So there are a number of different ways you can do this rotation. It's one of the cool things about Q method is that it allows you this flexibility of interpretation, of exploring the data to see what's in there. It's not just a single right answer that the data analysis program is going to spit out for you. Once you decide on how you want to do your rotation, you've got your factors. Each of these factors will give you a shared viewpoint, and it'll average together those people that share that viewpoint and say, here's what's kind of common to these people outside of their own little individual quirks. You can then share those interpretations of those factors with your participants. You can get their feedback. Am I interpreting this viewpoint right? Do the people that made up this factor recognize what I'm saying about them? Does it accord with how they think about their own viewpoint? And this is an important step, this sharing and getting feedback from the people that you did your analysis with to cross-check your understanding of what you've gotten out of the study. So Q is a very powerful tool for showing what people think, for defining the nature and the content of these viewpoints that people have, seeing what things are shared among different viewpoints, seeing how different viewpoints relate to each other. A very common thing that you'll find in a Q method study is you go into some situation where you have been assuming that the viewpoints were simply polarized, right? They're the pros and the antis. Two sides just totally diametrically opposed to each other, and what you find is actually there are first more than just 2 viewpoints. There might be 3 or 4 different viewpoints that people have, and that those viewpoints aren't necessarily diametrically opposed to each other, that they might be orthogonal to each other. There might be unexpected commonalities that you can find between these viewpoints where the people think that they're on just total opposite sides of things, but they actually are shown to have certain things in common. So we can get all this out of Q-method, but it can't tell us everything. So Q-method can't tell us how many people hold a certain viewpoint, because your sample of people you're working with is not going to necessarily be statistically representative of your entire population. And Q can't tell us why people hold certain viewpoints if we're thinking that in a causal sense, right? If we want to say, well, people hold viewpoint X because they are members of this race or gender, or because they've had this experience in their life, right? If we want to attribute some sort of external cause to why people hold a certain viewpoint, you can't do that within Q on its own. But the nice thing about Q is that it can easily be integrated into a multi-method study. You can integrate it with qualitative approaches like ethnography or interviews, and you can integrate it with quantitative approaches like a survey or even an experiment. So you can connect Q with these other methods to get a fuller picture of what's going on and answer your larger research questions. And so that's something we'll be talking about towards the end of our seminar, is how to connect Q method with these other sorts of methods that you may be working with in your study. So the next step for you is going to be to try out doing a Q-sort yourself. So you should have the link in your materials to a sample online Q-sort that I set up. I used the materials from a study that I did a few years back where I looked at the perspectives of students in my environmental justice class about environmental justice issues. So the concourse that study deals with is environmental justice as it was framed within the course that I was teaching. You'll see statements about various aspects of environmental justice. And so the goal of this is, we're not collecting your data. We're not going to use this data for everything. This isn't like a study we're going to publish or anything. But we just want you to go through the process of doing the Q-sort from the point of view of a research participant, because that will give you a good sense of how Q method works, at least at the data collection stage, what kind of stuff goes into a Q method study, and what it's like to be a participant in one of these studies. And then you'll also get to see the specific web tool that we're going to be working with in this seminar. There are a number of different ones out there. We're going to be focusing on what we think is the simplest and easiest one to set up, called Easy HTML Q. So you should go to that link, do that study. Don't worry too much about your answers to it. The goal is just to get that experience of being in a Q study. And then Gretchen and I will see you on Monday for our first live session.